The first time he inspected me, I thought the worst part would be being looked at. I was wrong. The worst part was how ordinary everyone acted afterward. My mother went back to kneading bread. My father stepped outside to check a harness. His mother folded a dish towel twice and laid it beside the basin. Nobody raised their voice. Nobody called it cruel. Nobody even called it an inspection. They called it being practical. I was 19 years old, 6 days from marrying the man I had been courting for almost a year. And I remember standing near the kitchen window with my hands held out in front of me while he looked at my palms, my wrists, my teeth, my posture, and the way I moved when I crossed the room. The second time happened 3 days later. That is the part I did not understand then. Once should have been enough if the purpose was only health. Twice meant something else. My name is Hannah. I grew up in a conservative old-order Amish community in rural Ohio, and I left years later. I want to be exact. This was my experience in my family and district. Amish communities differ, and I am not saying every Amish woman was examined before marriage. I am telling you that I was. Twice. The week before my wedding was cold. I remember that because the window above our kitchen sink kept fogging at the corners. My mother would wipe it with the edge of her apron. Then a few minutes later the glass would cloud again. The wood stove made the kitchen too warm while the hallway stayed cold, and every time the door opened I could smell the barn. That morning my mother told me his family was coming after breakfast. I thought they were bringing fabric. There were still small things to finish for the wedding, and women were always arriving with something folded over an arm or tucked into a basket. I asked if I should change my apron. My mother said, "No. Wear what you work in." That sentence should have told me something. I just did not know what. When he came in, he was with his mother and an older aunt. My father stayed near the doorway. No one sat down at first. I remember hearing the clock above the shelf. I remember one of the horses shifting outside. I remember thinking that everyone looked too serious for a visit about fabric. His mother finally said, "It is better to know things before vows than after." Those were her exact words, or as close as memory gives them to me. I looked at my mother. She did not look back. My future husband was not an angry man. He was quiet, hard-working, respected, and considered a good match. That is one reason it took me so long to understand what happened. Systems do not need dangerous-looking people. They need ordinary people who believe the system is right. His aunt asked me to hold out my hands. I did. She turned them over, looked at the skin, nails, joints, and small work scars, then asked me to bend my fingers and make a fist. I had spent my whole life working with those hands, but in that room they were no longer just hands, they were evidence. Could I work? Was I strong? Was there anything hidden that might become a burden after marriage? My future husband stood close enough to watch. Then his mother asked me to smile. I did not understand. She repeated it. So I smiled. She looked at my teeth. My face became hot. Nobody laughed. Nobody softened the moment. Nobody said, "We know this feels strange." The assumption was that usefulness could be checked and discomfort did not need to be discussed. Then I was asked to walk from the stove to the hallway and back. Not far. Perhaps 10 steps. I can still hear my shoes on the wooden floor. His aunt watched my hips and shoulders as I walked. My future husband watched too. That is the moment I felt something inside me go very still. I did not have the language for bodily autonomy. I did not know the phrase informed consent. I did not know how to say, "You are making me feel like livestock at a sale." I only knew that I wanted it to stop. But wanting something to stop and believing you are allowed to stop it are two very different things. Before we continue, let us know in the comments, what city are you watching from, and what time is it there right now? And when the story is over, come back and tell us what you thought. We'd love to hear your honest review. Now, let's get back to the story. In the world I grew up in, a good girl did not make a room uncomfortable because she was uncomfortable. That was considered selfish, so I finished the walk. I stood where they told me. I answered questions about headaches, fainting, monthly sickness, appetite, sleep, and whether I tired easily during summer work. Some of those questions could be reasonable between two people preparing for marriage. The problem was not that health mattered. The problem was who was being evaluated, who was allowed to ask, and who was expected to answer without being asked how she felt. No one asked to inspect him. No one asked me whether I had concerns about his health. No one asked whether I felt safe with him. No one asked whether I wanted this process. That absence was not accidental. At the time I thought my embarrassment was proof that I was immature. Now I think my embarrassment was information. After they left, I asked my mother if that was normal. She kept working the dough. She said, "Marriage is too important for surprises." I asked, "Did father's family do that with you?" Her hands stopped for maybe 1 second. Then they started again. She said, "Things were different." I waited. That was all she gave me. For years, I was angry at her. Now I understand it differently. My mother had learned to reduce complicated truths into practical sentences. She did not believe she had the power to challenge what was happening. So she said, "Things were different." That was how women spoke around danger. Sideways, 3 days later, his mother came again. This time she did not bring the aunt. She brought him. My father was away helping a neighbor. My younger brothers were outside. My mother was sewing near the window. His mother said they wanted to check one more thing. I felt my stomach tighten. I asked what. She said, "Nothing to worry over." That sentence has stayed with me because people often say it when they have already decided your worry is irrelevant. This second inspection was shorter, but it frightened me more. I was asked whether I had ever injured my back, whether I could lift a full laundry basket without pain, whether I had trouble climbing stairs, whether I had ever been told by a doctor that something was wrong with me. Then came a question about whether the women in my family had difficulty having children. I looked at my mother. Again she did not look at me. I said I did not know. His mother said, "Your mother knows." That was the first moment I realized this was not only about me as a person, it was about what my body was expected to produce. Work, children, endurance, a household that functioned. The questions were not asked with hatred. They were asked the way someone might ask about a field before purchasing it. What condition is it in? What will it yield? When people ask me now why I did not refuse, I understand the question, but it comes from a world where refusal is imagined as a sentence. No, in my world refusal was not one sentence. Refusal was a chain of consequences. No could mean disappointing my parents. No could mean insulting his family. No could mean delaying the wedding. No could mean questions from church leadership. No could mean being called fearful, stubborn, or prideful. No could mean becoming the girl people whispered about after service. A choice is not meaningful simply because two words exist. Yes and no. A choice becomes meaningful when both answers are survivable. I did not know that then. I know it now. A few days after the second inspection, an older woman from our district came to help with baking. I will call her Ruth. She was not a rebel. She dressed like everyone else. She attended church faithfully. She had raised 6 children. She did not speak against the ministers, but she noticed things. While my mother was carrying trays to the pantry, Ruth stood beside me at the table rolling dough. Without looking up, she asked, "Were they satisfied?" I knew immediately what she meant. I said yes. She pressed the rolling pin forward. Then she said, "Satisfied is not the same thing as kind." I looked at her. She did not look at me. That was how forbidden truth traveled among women. Not in speeches, not in declarations, in kitchens. Over dough, with eyes lowered. I asked, "Was it like that for you?" She said, "Not exactly." Then she added, "There are things people call practical because calling them personal would make them ashamed." That sentence stayed in me for years. I did not fully understand it, but I remembered it. I married him. The wedding happened on schedule. No one mentioned the inspections again. And that was almost the strangest part. Something that had made me feel exposed and small simply disappeared from public conversation, as if silence could erase what a room had witnessed. Years later, after I had left the Amish, I told a therapist about those 2 days. I told her I was not sure they counted as anything serious because nobody hit me. Nobody threatened me directly. Nobody used ugly words. She asked one question. "Could you have said no without risking your belonging?" I did not answer for a long time because that question reorganized the memory. I had spent years asking whether the inspection was severe enough to justify how I felt. She asked whether I had been free. Those are not the same question. I want to be careful. Families discuss health and expectations before marriage. That is not abuse. The line I care about is choice. Was I informed? Was it mutual? Could I refuse? In my case, the answers were not equal. He was preparing to become a husband. I was being assessed for the role of wife. That difference shaped everything. For a long time I blamed him, then his mother, then my parents. Now I see a larger picture. He had been taught that asking was responsible. His mother believed evaluation protected the household. My mother had learned that embarrassment was part of becoming a wife. The framework made male authority, female usefulness, fertility, and obedience easier to discuss than a young woman's interior life. Explanation is not excuse. It only explains how ordinary people could make me feel less like a bride and more like property being transferred. The system taught them not to notice my silence, and it taught me not to notice myself. That is what control does when it is woven into ordinary life. It does not always arrive as a locked door. Sometimes it arrives as a mother wiping flour from her hands, a future husband standing quietly in a kitchen, an aunt asking you to walk across the floor, a question about children you have not even decided whether you want. A sentence like, "It is better to know things before vows than after." Everything sounds reasonable one piece at a time. The meaning appears only when you step back. If you grew up somewhere that taught you your body was a family matter, a church matter, a husband's matter, or a community matter before it was yours, I want you to hear me clearly. You were allowed to have an interior life. You were allowed to feel discomfort before you knew how to explain it. You were allowed to want privacy. You were allowed to ask why. You were allowed to say no, and if you did not say no because the cost felt too high, that does not mean you freely said yes. People sometimes ask, why didn't you just leave? But leaving begins long before a suitcase. It begins with language. The first freedom I gained was the ability to name what had happened: objectification, unequal consent, community pressure, bodily autonomy. Words did not change the past. They changed my ownership of it. For years, that kitchen belonged to everyone else in my memory: his mother, my future husband, the aunt, the rules, the expectations. Now when I remember it, I see the 19-year-old girl by the cold window. Her hands are held out. Her face is hot. She is trying not to make trouble, and I want to reach backward through time and tell her one thing. You're not being difficult because you want to be treated like a person. You're not immature because your body reacts before your mind has words. You're not selfish because you want a boundary. And you do not owe anyone access simply because they call it tradition. The first inspection taught me how thoroughly a community could turn a person into a role. The second taught me that once your feelings are removed from the equation, there is no natural point where the asking stops. That is why twice matters. Not because the second time was dramatically worse, because the second time revealed the rule. My body could be questioned again because nobody had established that it belonged to me first. That is the truth I wish someone had told me before my wedding. Not a lesson about husbands, not a lesson about Amish people as a whole. A lesson about ownership. Tradition can ask many things of you. Family can ask many things of you. Faith can ask many things of you. But a request becomes coercion when refusal carries a punishment you cannot reasonably bear. And privacy does not become selfish simply because other people are curious. If there was a Ruth in your life, someone who told you the truth quietly when everyone else was protecting the system, remember her? Maybe she only gave you one sentence. Sometimes one sentence is enough to survive on until you find the rest of the language. Ruth told me, satisfied is not the same thing as kind. Today I would add something else. Being permitted is not the same thing as being right. Being traditional is not the same thing as being harmless. And being silent is not the same thing as consenting. My hands belong to me now. My voice belongs to me now. My no belongs to me now. It always should have.